Hi, Amina. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's always a joy to sit with you.
I know, I think you're like probably the most repeated guest we've had on the show. This is what, your third time? Fourth
This
time?
is third or fourth. What an
Yeah,
honor.
I know. When we can't keep track, then we know it's been a long, many times, which all for good reasons. And if you guys, I'll put all of your past episodes in the show notes because they've all been really amazing topics. But
Thank
tell us,
you.
what have you been up to since we chatted last, which was, I think, about a year ago?
Yes. So in the last year, continuing to coach, but the biggest effort has been working on my book, The Ambition Trap, which we're going to talk about today. And that was all consuming and took a lot of energy and heartbeats and resilience and all the things that we talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so for people who maybe haven't listened to your past episodes, give them like a quick TLDR of like, what do you do besides write this book and be a published author?
Yes. So I'm Amina AlTai, and I'm a holistic coach, and my work touches on career, mindset, and well-being because I believe that we really need to examine all three parts with the same diligence to actually thrive. And I get to work with amazing souls that usually they're a bit more further along in their career. They've kind of gotten to the top of the mountain, looked around, and realized this is not it. This doesn't bring me joy. I don't feel the freedom that I'm supposed to feel. I want to do something that is more aligned. And that's who I usually work with.
Well, that's a perfect segue because I wanted to ask you about the book, The Ambition Trap, which is essentially a guide to help readers define ambition. Why do we need to redefine ambition in the first place? And I'm sure you kind of learned this from a bunch of people who were incredibly ambitious and reached their goals and then kind of asked why. So tell us about that.
Yes, I had a front row seat to ambition and also in my own life. And, I think it's really interesting because I think a lot of us, especially my generation, I'm an elder millennial. I came of age in the workplace around girl boss, tech bro
Yep.
culture. And I was swept up in that. I don't know about you, but I was like, oh, I would be the
Totally.
first one in, the last one out.
Yep.
And I had this idea that ambition was more for more sake all the time, that it's just this line going towards the sky and we never stop. But that approach costs us our health, it costs us our relationship, and ultimately it can uphold oppressive systems. And that was my story. I had this real health crash and burn, which I probably talked about on a previous episode with you. So it's really important that we really redefine ambition because it isn't more for more's sake. Actually, ambition in its purest form is simply a desire to grow, a desire to unfold. And it's neutral and it's natural and it's for everyone. But as a society, we make it right for people and we make it wrong for some other people, right? So there's all this data and these studies that say ambitious men are seen as strong and powerful, ambitious women often seen as aggressive, even called the B word, right?
Yeah.
And so we have this double bind around ambition. And so I wanted to redefine it for us all. And in the book, I talk about yes, ambition is neutral and natural, but certain cultural forces have us come from what I call painful ambition, which is ambition that is driven by our core wounds, very much the girl boss tech bro that I was alluding to, right?
Yeah.
We want all of the accolades outside of ourselves to feel valuable, and we'll do anything it takes to get there. But obviously, that doesn't work. And the invitation is to pivot into more purposeful ambition, which is ambition that comes from our truth and our sense of purpose.
I love that. I think it makes me think of like intrinsic motivation versus like external motivation. And
Exactly.
like once you kind of are able to decode that for yourself, you're like, wow, I feel way more energized and pep in my step and, enjoying this thing that I'm doing because you're intrinsically motivated, not externally motivated. And so I like that this is almost like a way to find your intrinsic ambition and like define what that is. I mean,
It's a
I
perfect
talk,
way to say it.
yeah, and I mean, people have heard this a lot in the podcast, but I'm a big believer in like the good enough job for this reason. And to your point about the girl boss era, I think it was also the era of dream jobs. Like, not only did you believe that you should have a dream job, but you believed they existed, right? And so if you didn't have one, what were you doing wrong? And back to your point about like it it sets you up for this like just nonstop feeling of unhappiness and like you never like kind of quite get to the top or you didn't quite reach the thing and you're the problem. So
It's so beautifully
anyway,
said. One of the foundations of purposeful ambition in the book is contentment, right? So a lot of the times that is the good enough job because if we're perpetually chasing happiness in the dream, it's a fool's errand, right? Because
yes.
things in life are transient. Things are always changing. It's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, similar to contentment, but maybe the opposite. I do want to talk about the resentment line. I have not heard about this yet, but I have absolutely had resentment in the workplace before. And so I understand the concept, but just sort of like resentment line is something new. So can you talk about the concept of the resentment line in your book? And can you explain what it is and how people can recognize maybe if they're operating below it?
Yes. So the resentment line is exactly what it sounds like. It is the line in which, if we're operating beneath it, we feel resentful, or if we cross it, we're feeling resentful. And that line could be a line about overworking. It could be a line around being properly supported. It could be a line around making enough money. And if we operate below that line, we are kicking rocks. We're completely unhappy. Yeah, we feel resentful. Now, sometimes this has happened in a few instances with my clients where the word resentment doesn't jibe with them. That's not the feeling that they have. And so in that case, it's about the opportunity cost. So I'll give you an example. I had a client and she was a new mother, and the word resentment didn't land for her. She was like, I never feel resentful. Like, I love everything. And I was like, well, you have this brand new amazing baby, right? So when you are the last one there at night and you're doing everybody else's work, there's a big opportunity cost. You're not spending time with your baby. And she was like, oh, now I understand what you're talking about. And so if the word resentment doesn't land for you, ask yourself how you feel about the opportunity cost of where you're spending your time.
Absolutely. I interviewed a time management coach once on the podcast, and she talked about leaving room in your schedule for the nine and the tens, because if you fill it up with the ones and the twos and the threes, you don't have room for the things in life that are big, the nines, the tens, And this so feels almost like a similar concept of like if you're filling your life up or your work life up with all these one, two, three type tasks, and you're never getting the nines and the tens to really celebrate and push you forward, you might start to feel resentful or have that opportunity cost. Wow, that person's very optimistic and glass half full, because I'm like, as a mother, I'm like, I have a lot of resentment for that kind of stuff.
Same. Resentment
So
really lands for me.
yeah, totally, totally. Okay, so many of us don't even realize that we're carrying resentment at work until I think it starts to spill over. What are some early warning signs that we're creeping below that line?
Yeah. I think a big one that I see with clients is feeling less committed to doing great work, because usually there are people that are like, I want to do the best job. I want to knock it
Right.
out of the park. And when they're like, you know what? I don't need to dot that I, and cross that T. I'm like, everything okay there? They're living below the resentment line because their needs aren't met. So then they don't want to go the extra mile. And that makes complete sense. I'll also notice that they'll start to have less care and concern for their colleagues, for their clients, and other constituents. Are kind of like, they just have less tolerance for BS or less capacity for those people. Um, and it's when the exchange starts to feel uneven, right? You're like, okay, I know I'm giving a lot. I'm not necessarily getting a lot back. You're noticing it. It's landing in a particular way in your body. And as a result of that, you might be short-tempered with people. So you might be more irritable than you were before because you're not having your needs met, and that impacts us.
Yeah, absolutely. This immediately made me think about like my relationship with social media, especially like when I was running it with Career Contessa. It would be like you'd put all this energy and effort in, and then like three people would see something. And like I know this is
Yes.
like a really silly example, but I hope it feels tangible to people, of this feeling of like you're putting something in, but you're not getting the thing back. And you're like, at some point, I need to have a return. I think this is really similar to a
Exactly.
lot of journeys of like if you were trying to lose weight and nothing ever happened, but you were making all this effort, it's hard to stay motivated. So, I mean, I'm trying to think about this in the sense of work, but also other parts of my life where I'm like, yeah, I could see like what you're about to talk about with these strategies could probably apply to other parts of your life too.
It's such a great point. Like, I think there's a great health and wellness crossover. There's a story that I tell in the book, and it's somebody that was like a new entrepreneur. And when we were first kind of pricing their offer, I said, like, where's the resentment line for you? And they're like, oh, there's no resentment line. This is great. I'm so happy. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's start here. Like, let's check it in a month. We checked in a month, and she's like, no, 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 I'm still really great. I love this pricing. And I was like, okay, let's just watch it. 3 months later, she shows up to a session and she is just like beat, bedraggled, so annoyed. And I'm like, what is going on? And she's like, well, I've got all these clients. I'm flooded with work, but I'm not flooded with money. So I can't
Yeah.
hire. I'm not spending time with my son, and I'm annoyed about that. And I was like, okay, let's bring back in the resentment line. Are you living below it? And she's like, now I understand the concept.
Yeah.
We can
Yes.
raise the prices.
Totally, totally. Okay, so let's talk about a few strategies to help people live above the resentment line, especially at work. One of the strategies you mentioned is, quote, getting clear on your capacity. So, how can someone assess their work capacity realistically, especially in very high demand jobs? And I might add, especially when you maybe have this fear of like, I have to give 130% because there's layoffs and there's this and there's that. And like, I can't afford not to be A plus plus all the time.
Yeah, yeah. First and foremost, this is a great question, but our capacity ebbs and flows all the time, as does our workload. So this is something that's really important to check in on seasonally. Like my capacity right now in book launch, my workload in book launch is very different than a year where I'm not doing a book, right? So make sure that you're checking in at interval because it's changing all of the time. But one thing that I love to invite my clients to do is to make a scorecard. So you want to ask yourself, like, of the things that are on my plate, how heavy is this lift? Is it on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the heaviest, one being the lightest? Then based on that, asking yourself, if it's really heavy, are you willing to lift it? Right? Because sometimes there's something on our plate that actually it's a 10 and there's no way that we want to spend the energy to lift that 10. So I think it's really important to ask ourselves, are we willing to lift it? And then again, what is the opportunity cost? So if I use all of my capacity and energy to lift this 10, then I have zero left for the other things. Is that okay? Can I make that work? Can I be agile enough in this season, knowing that I can recoup down the line? So, really having that conversation with ourselves and being clear and making a scorecard because the numbers don't lie. Sometimes we
Yeah.
want to tell ourselves a story, we let it get emotional, but the numbers don't lie.
And when you are putting numbers to things, do you have a total that you're going, like, your total is like 20 points in a week or 20 points in a day, like, or is it just everything's on a 1 to 10 scale?
That's a great question. I've never done the total piece, but that could be a really fun way to take this to the next level. Right now, everything's on a scale and see what that means for you. And if you want to total it up and that means something for you, great.
Yeah, you're like, when I hit 30 in a week, I'm at capacity. I've
I
surpassed my
love that.
capacity. Okay, this is really funny and very old school, but I was one of the lucky people who didn't just gain the freshman 15 when I went to college. I gained the freshman 30 and I did Weight Watchers that summer, which I loved. Like, this was like old school Weight Watchers to you guys. This is like, oh my God, I'm going to date myself, but like almost 20 years ago kind of thing. It was amazing, but it was a point system. And so you would find out how many points you had. And it's like
Remember.
gamifying. Yeah. Do you remember? Like, this is
Yep.
like so old school for anyway, I loved it. It taught me all these good habits, but it like gamifies like that process. And I think I immediately had this thought to this where I was like, you have to figure out what your capacity number is and then be like, okay, this thing is a 3 pointer. And now in my week, I only have room for this kind of stuff. And I think not only, again, the whole point isn't to live your whole life counting points, but it's to bring awareness to what you're doing, mindfulness, and sort of like everything in moderation. Like, to your point, if you're doing something with a 10, then you probably can't have 14 10 items on your list. You're gonna hit resentment.
Yes, and this is a great point that reminds me of something that I want to share is that the nervous system thrives when we have more resources than demands. That's something that my dear friend who's a nervous system trainer to Olympians says. Her name's Sarah Tacey Tangretti. So the nervous system needs more resources than it does demands, right? So if it requires all of your capacity and then you're left with zero, you have nothing left for the other parts of your life, for your family, for your friendships,
Yeah.
to drop into the next project, right? So we also need to make sure that we're constantly putting back into ourselves so that our nervous systems can thrive. And putting back into ourselves can look like community, having coffee with a friend, a workout if we have the privilege of moving our body, meditation. So think of the ways that you can also expand your capacity if you're in a season that's requiring a lot.
Oh, I love this. I'm like a 1 plus 1 equals 2 person. Like, I need that logic. So
Yeah.
this is like speaking my language where I'm like, oh, we'll just put numbers to everything.
Right.
So I love it. Okay. So you also emphasize setting boundaries as a key strategy. This is not necessarily something new. I think people hear this a lot, but
Yeah.
tell me, what are some practical ways to set and enforce work boundaries without the fear of backlash, or again, like this fear of like, I need to let this person know I can't do this thing, but I also am worried, like, what if there's layoffs and I don't look like a team player? I was thinking about this the other day, like, sometimes there's this fine line between being a team player and a people pleaser at work. And I think that's where the setting boundary conversations get much more tactile, and hopefully you have some practical advice, because I feel like the just overall overarching advice of like set boundaries feels a little too high level for everybody.
Yes, you're so right. There's so much nuance in there. And the fear of backlash is so real, particularly for women and other historically
Yep.
excluded people. Often if we set boundaries, right, there's a more severe reaction. And so I think one of the most important ways that we can set boundaries, and we can even use an example so we can really drill into the nuance, is that we need to create psychological safety. Because if we just show up with the boundary and that's it, and we don't do it in a psychologically safe way, someone's going to have a fear response. And in their fear response, there could potentially be backlash. And so Prentice Hemphill has this great quote on boundaries where they say, boundaries is the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. And I think in the work context, it's the distance at which I can honor me and you or the work at the same time. And that's the key there, right? We're honoring both of us at the same time versus
Right.
thinking that boundaries are a vehicle to keep people out. So, when it comes to psychological safety, if you're going to set a boundary, choose your logistics really thoughtfully. So, choose a space that you know is psychologically safe for them. Is it their office? Is it a place that they feel really comfortable? Get them their favorite beverage, right? Do things to make this feel psychologically safe for them. The other thing is make it a discussion. Like I remember when I first learned boundaries, like this is my early 20s, I over rotated, right? Where I was like, oh, it's such a fierce boundary and it's to keep people out, right? We don't
Yeah.
want to do that. Boundaries are a discussion. So invite them into a conversation. And one of the best things that I think that we can do is really share the impact of not having the boundary. And here's what I mean. So don't just share the impact that it has on you, right? So if I don't have this boundary, then it means that I'm going to drop the ball. No. What's the impact on the team? What's the impact on the organization? What's the potential impact on the bottom line, right? Because when you kind of prove the business case for the boundary, they're going to be able to hear you even more. So you've
Yeah.
made it psychologically safe and you proved the business case. So this isn't about, first of all, your needs are important and let's just say that, right? You deserve to have your needs met. And they're going to hear you more if you put it in language that is meaningful for them.
Yeah, you gotta talk in a way that it's a language they understand and they can interpret. Yeah, and
Exactly.
we had a whole episode about basically like emotions and mental health at work, and that was one of the key things she talked about was like you have to put it in a language where the other person understands. Like they're not trained therapists, so throwing a bunch of emotions at somebody, even though you are valid in having those emotions, it's like that that's not a language they know what to do with. They're not trained on how to know what to know to do with it. I can't say it.
Exactly. Or
But
to
yeah,
decode it, right? So we have to
yes.
do that work for them. And then the last thing I'll say about boundaries is like come with suggestions, right? Because especially if you're going to a manager, it's not always helpful to look for them to solve your problems, right? They don't always want to do that. So
They
what is
do not want to do that.
I don't want to do that. So what
Yeah.
is your recommendation? What is your suggestion for how we can make this work for you, for the whole team, for the bottom line, all the things?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also, I feel like, again, going back to one of your earlier points, it's a collaboration. You guys are working on this together. So putting all the power in their court to decide what your boundary is sort of takes, it's like, wait. I thought this was a collaboration. I thought it was a partnership. So
Right.
I feel like that's sort of unfair to do them as well.
Exactly. Great point.
Okay, your third strategy is knowing your trade-offs, which is another crucial step. How can professionals navigate trade-offs in a way that aligns with their long-term career goals? And I just want to say I love the word trade-offs because I don't think it's talked about enough when people are kind of giving advice. It always feels like you can have your cake and eat it too. And I think trade-offs is it's reality of life, right? So
Yeah.
let's talk about that
Yeah.
one.
You always ask the best questions. I have to say that. They're always like really specific, which I think is so important because, like you said, when the advice is too amorphous, we can't
Yeah,
sink our teeth into it. Trade-offs are so important, right? Because going back to the capacity, we don't have endless capacity. We're human beings, right? So if we know that our capacity is full and a new project comes down the pike, when we're setting the boundary and we want to live above the resentment line, we need to communicate that there might be a trade-off. So we
right.
would say to our manager, well, if I take on this project, it means that I'm going to need to hand this piece off to somebody else. And the way that we can do this in a way to support our long-term career goals and visions is to decide which one of the pieces of work is actually going to stretch you. So if the piece that you're holding on to, it's something that you've done before, it's tried and true, you've got deep neural pathways in that space, great. That's something that we should hand off because there's somebody that likely doesn't know how to do that. And
Yeah.
that's going to be a stretch thing for them. And that's awesome. And then you also get to stretch and flex a new skill that's going to set you up for your career growth as well. So be thinking really strategically of like who on my team needs to grow in this area so I can hand it off. And this is development for them, which is awesome and a great way to
Yes.
position it. And then where do I need development so I can decide which pieces to hold on to?
Yes, and to your point, that's how you grow. Another way I have talked about this on the podcast as well, is like the invaluable employee versus indispensable. The indispensable person
Love that.
stays in the same spot. They cannot move because they're so good. We cannot afford to lose you. Whereas the invaluable employee, we can put them anywhere and they will adapt, they will grow, they will figure it out. To your point, they will stretch themselves. That person is much more valuable to an organization than the person who's like, to your point, I've got all the neural pathways. I can do this thing in my sleep and I don't want to give it up. So even if you're saying, but I have to learn this new skill or get out of my comfort zone, like all I can tell you is you have to do that to stretch and to also realize that that is how you're going to have new opportunities at work. And maybe you'll learn something new that you didn't know along the way too. So it's like having that mindset also that trade-offs are not necessarily a bad thing. Like sometimes I think the word trade-off is an immediate negative to people. It's like, well, no,
Yes.
it's kind of like prioritization, right?
Exactly. I love the distinction between the invaluable and the indispensable. I think that's so smart. And not that we need more for more's sake, right? Well, I kind of
Right.
contextualize ambition for us that way, but developing new skills is a great thing, especially in the world that we're in where
Yeah.
our careers are changing. I have a lot of clients in the entertainment industry and there's a lot of changes happening there, right? So having a new skill, upskilling, reskilling isn't a bad thing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. In my world, it's all about AI. Like, how are you using AI, or like different technology? And I will be honest, there are days where I'm like, I just need everything to sit still for 2 seconds, like the fatigue of learning new stuff, yada yada. But also, when I kind of master a new skill or I do something different and I have the success of it, it's really motivating. And like that is the confidence boost that I like didn't know I needed. That for
Mhm.
me, at least in my life.
No, I think that's a great way to put it. I love that.
Okay, so strategy number 4 is you mentioned that ensuring you're resourced is essential, right? And to avoiding resentment. What are some overlooked ways we can advocate for fair compensation and just work conditions or the work resources that you need?
I don't know that this is overlooked, but I do think that there's so much value in pay equity audits. And a lot of organizations voluntarily do them, which is amazing. And then
Yep.
a lot of organizations aren't doing them, but you can request them. And it becomes a great way to see if you are actually whole, if you are in the place where you want to be within the salary bands, and if it's equitable. And I think that that's so important. Another thing that I think is really important these days is building collective power. And I think it's an interesting time, right? Because we're seeing a lot of changes in the ERGs and in the employee resource groups. And so how we kind of build collective power, I think is going to look a little different, but it doesn't mean that we can't have conversations around things. And so working as a group for better policies, more transparency, better benefits, more leadership accountability, those are conversations we can continue to have with our groups. And I think that that's super important. And the other thing I think is we need to normalize talking about money and benefits. And like
Totally.
I have a group of women that I went to undergrad with that all ended up in sort of in business professions. We all went to the business school. And what I love so much about that group is we are always talking about money.
Yep.
And there's not a lot of spaces where people do that. And I think that we need to, there's nothing taboo about it. Money is like ambition, right? It's neutral, but we make it mean something. So talk about it, please.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also I have found that going to a manager and being like specifically here's the other like besides compensation, but like maybe here's a resource I need. I need access to this tool. I need to hire a freelancer to help with this.
Yes.
Going to them and being really specific versus just saying I need more help. It just like give them something to go off of. So that would be my only other piece of advice besides the money conversation, which I agree wholeheartedly on that, is like sometimes what you need is not more money because even with more money, you still can't, if the situation doesn't change, what you need is, a virtual assistant, a freelancer to help with this one specific task that's incredibly time consuming, whatever it is, but like try to be specific and know what it is that you're asking for. I think it goes a lot further also for you as well. Like look at
I
your list. What are the tens? What are the things that are like really big and heavy that you need help with?
Yes. I read this study that was like when we're unhappy at work, we need 40% more money, right? So if it's just about the money, I think it's important to ask ourselves some other questions of like what else
Yeah,
isn't working here and what are the other ways exactly what you're saying, what are the other ways we can be made whole? Is it more support? Do we
yep,
want to be upskilling or reskilling around something and do we want some benefits towards that? But what does it
totally.
look like to be made whole? I love
Yep,
that.
yep. I totally agree. It's usually a bigger picture than just money. Okay, I have two final questions. One, because I love personal stories and I know you have worked with a ton of clients. Can you share a story of someone who has successfully implemented these strategies and just saw a huge, big shift in their career satisfaction?
Yes. So one story that I love, and it's not somebody they were an entrepreneur, but they were working in a co-op, right? So it was employee owned. They had founded it, but it was a co-op. And so everyone was sharing equally in the profits, but people were absolutely not sharing equally in the work. And this
Sounds like a
person
group
was,
project in school.
it was exactly like that. And I like really related because I was always the one,
Yeah.
carrying the load.
Yeah.
And so I was just watching this person do all the work, not get the money, then it eating into their quality of life, not getting time with their family, all of the things. And so this was one person actually that the resentment line language again didn't really resonate for. And so we were talking about, okay, but the rest of your life, the opportunity cost here, right? Like you haven't seen your family in weeks, you're stressed all the time. Like,
Yeah.
let's talk about
Sad
this.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we looked at the opportunity cost and they were like, okay, I understand finally what you're saying. And, there's like a little bit of codependency in there. But when we set the boundaries with their team, it was actually really interesting. The team did not show up to do the work, and then a ball was dropped. But it was a very important ball that needed to be dropped so they could feel the pain of that dropped ball so they wouldn't drop the ball again, if that
Yeah.
makes any sense. It's like
Yes.
sometimes as leaders, I think this is the hardest thing to do is let people miss the mark because we'll bend over backwards to fill in the gap for them and hurt ourselves or make ourselves uncomfortable in the process. But letting that ball drop taught them a really important lesson, and they will never let a ball drop again.
This is like the parenting advice of like let your kid forget their school lunch because then they'll never forget it again versus like bring it to them, you know? So yeah, I
Totally.
totally relate to this. Love that. If listeners take away just one action from today's conversation, what should it be?
Check in with yourself. Where is the resentment line? And when you find that resentment line, we may be like really worked up about it, right? We might want to scorch the earth, and that's not the point, right? We want to kind of be in right relationship. And it's like when we first set boundaries and we over rotate, right? It can be like that with
Yeah,
a resentment line. So, first of all, journal on it and own your role in it because we usually have some sort of role in it, right? Like when I was living below the resentment line, it's because I love being the good girl that's getting the credit and the kudos for doing all the work, right? Like that's mine to own. That's my
right.
problem. So own your role in it. And then I want you to carve out a psychologically safe space to have conversations with people where you need to really shift the boundaries or talk about the trade-offs so that we can really change our reality. And do this at interval, right? Because like I said, our capacity is always shifting, the seasons are always different. So don't just set the boundaries once and think it's a one and done. Have this conversation at interval.
That's like all the advice on the show. All career advice is never one and done, you guys. It's
Right.
always a constant. But I
We
really,
wish.
yeah, we wish, right? I like the advice of checking with yourself because just knowing what your capacity limit is, I think is it's walking around with a self-awareness that 90% of people don't know. And you can kind of be like, ooh, I know I'm getting close to this, or I know what's about to happen, without, losing your shit because all of a sudden you've been under resourced and below your resentment line for way too long. So,
Yes.
um, Amina, as usual, this has been such a great conversation. Tell people where they can learn more about you, buy your book, tell them about the book again. I'm going to put all of this in the show notes as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always the best to sit with you. I love your questions. I love your perspective. I'm always learning from you. So thank you for having me. And the book is called The Ambition Trap. You can get it everywhere you buy books. And it is about reconciling our relationship with ambition so that we can stop chasing and start living.
Ah, I love that title. It's like, sign me up for whatever you're selling. I love it. Thank you
Oh,
so much.
thank you so much.